How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
3 times a day.
Yeah, once a week.
Definitely weekly.
At least once a day.
Not all men think about the Roman Empire. White men think about the Roman Empire. Google searches show consistent interest and recent spike in the Roman Empire. The cities showing the most interest mostly have populations much wider than the US average of 62%. As for what women think about, it's being kidnapped. Google Trends validates this with similar interest levels and the exact same average interest over the past year. Women, you are not alone in being scared of men and confused by men.
You just found out that your boyfriend or husband thinks about the Roman Empire every day. Is that a red flag? Maybe. Ever since men on TikTok have started admitting to their wives and girlfriends that they think about the Roman Empire every single day, there's been media companies trying to explain why this obsession is happening. And I think the Rolling Stone has a very interesting take on this. They went and interviewed Mike Duncan, who has this very popular podcast called The History of Rome. He's also written a ton of books about the Roman Empire. And if your husband or boyfriend is actually interested in the Roman Empire, there's a good chance they read or heard his material. Duncan explains the reason why so many men likely find the Roman Empire fascinating is because it's kind of akin to military history. So much about the Roman Empire is about war, strategy, politics. And men's fascination with the Roman Empire evolves over time to just be like fascination with war. The comedian John Mulaney actually has a whole skit about how so many dads are interested in World War II history, and it's actually sort of related to why so many men are also interested in the Roman Empire. But the most fascinating thing Mike Duncan says in this interview is that the Roman Empire is a patriarchal society. Almost everything in the Roman Empire is from a male's perspective. That's because women in ancient Rome were sort of on the sidelines. Women in the Roman Empire didn't have equal rights. They couldn't vote or hold office. They didn't even have their own names. Instead, they took the names of their family. So for example, Julius Caesar's daughter would take on the name Julia. The women who did have influence in Roman society were from rich or powerful families, but they did their power moves in private in individual negotiations. So instead, the women we hear about in the Roman Empire tend to be from mythology, or they're depicted in art. But we don't hear the stories of women who lived in the Roman Empire. Another reason why a lot of men are probably thinking about the Roman Empire so often, if that's really true, is that there's a lot of content about the Roman Empire. For example, in Western countries, the Roman Empire is taught in school. Also, the Roman Empire spanned 1,000 years. Jesus was born during the Roman Empire. So there's a lot of humanity attached to this history. And that's why we still continue to see Roman Empire content made today. Like the movie 300 comes to mind, quintessential patriarchal society, a movie about war, and even showcases like the male gaze. And there's also over 20 video games about the Roman Empire, for example, Assassin's Creed. And a lot of these games are about war strategy from the male perspective. Only now are we starting to tell stories with strong female leads through the perspective of women. Barbie is a great example of this, and over time, hopefully we'll see more.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
I don't know. Maybe more than once a week.
More than once a week?
Yeah.
Like once a day?
This is the question that many women across the internet have been asking the men in their lives.
I feel like it's like a pretty big part of history.
To their great surprise, many men report that they think very often about the Roman Empire.
I don't know, probably like 3 or 4 times a week I think about it.
You're kidding. It is unclear how the trend began, but on September 6th, a woman published a tweet saying that she saw a reel on Instagram saying that women had no idea how often men think about the Roman Empire.
Every time I fight people, I think about like walking into the Colosseum.
The hashtag Roman Empire now has 877.6 million views on TikTok. Many of those who have participated in the trend have been left dumbfounded by their findings and unable to comprehend the fascination with the ancient empire. The Roman Empire was established in 27 BCE following the collapse of the Roman Republic and lasted until the 5th century CE.
I have to admit, I don't understand the historical appeal, but I just wasn't expecting so many guys to be so passionate about the Roman Empire. But what do you think?
The real reason men like to think about the Roman Empire is because it was the last time in human history where it was socially acceptable for a man to be gay. And in fact, for certain members of society, it was looked at as quite odd for them not to take male lovers, specifically the rich and powerful. It was almost expected that you have a wife at home and you have a lover that you entertain, specifically a male lover. And you can see it in every single aspect of Roman society: sports, entertainment, politics, the military. It's all very male-centric on purpose. To the point that historians don't know the names of a lot of the women that were around during that time, even though the Romans took excellent records, because they didn't care about the women. So yeah, he's going to tell you that he's thinking about the recipe for Roman concrete, but in reality, he's wondering what it would have been like to sleep his way to the top and become the second most powerful man in the empire, right behind the emperor. Because ancient Rome was very, very gay.
What was the Roman army's stance on homosexuality in the military? The answer lies with general Roman ideas of sexuality, which focused less on the gender of individuals involved and more on the proper status of the active partner. For example, a free male citizen was expected to preserve their virtue by taking the dominant, active role in all relations. So long as this was the case, society generally accepted same-sex relations between free men and youths, slaves, social infamous, or others who were seen as beneath them. Any role reversal, even in heterosexual relationships, was seen as shameful. The Roman army followed this same approach. Because legionaries were all male citizens, their equal stature forbid them from same-sex relations, which would necessarily shame one participant as the submissive member. However, they were free to pursue diversions outside of the military structure on their own time. Our records even report how Roman commanders such as Trajan and Hadrian were known to love their wine and their boys. Stay tuned for an upcoming episode on these and more of Rome's gay emperors.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
This is a great question. I think about them all the time.
Oh,
I know. It's terrible. I love maps. I feel like I fall into all those terrible tropes, yes.
Do you ever think about the Roman Empire?
You ever think about the what?
The Roman Empire.
Like Marcus Aurelius, Alexander the Great Roman Empire?
Yeah, or like anything about it.
How often do I think about it?
Yeah.
I mean, not like, I don't know, probably a lot of cool shit happened back then. A few times a week, I'd say.
A few times a week?
About 2 or 3 times a week. Quotes and stuff. I've got Marcus Aurelius' book back there. Try to watch documentaries on it all the time. It's awesome. Why? Why do you ask that?
How long have you been thinking about it? Like, for how many years?
For a while. Since I was like a teenager. So when I first started watching a documentary on Amazon. We should watch it together, actually. Do you want to?
It's time for something juicy. Watch this. I'll be right back.
I was castrated and married to the Roman Emperor Nero. I am Sporus, a young slave boy whom the Roman Emperor Nero favored, had castrated, and married. In the 1st century AD,
that is known as pederasty, and it was very common in ancient Roman and Greek societies. In fact, there's some societies, like in Sparta in Greece, where it was legal to marry. So what was it? It was not what we probably think it was. It was not pedophilia and it was not homosexuality. Well, not totally. We're looking at it from our point of view. But in that day and age, it was very common for very powerful, very masculine men to take a, quote, model or, quote, boy toy, which was a translation, under their wing, and also have a semi-romantic relationship with them, although they were in love with and married to women. Recently, I was fortunate enough to go to Sirmione, Italy, which is the home place of Catullus. And he was a Roman poet, and he actually wrote about a lot of people in society, including himself, who was practicing pederasty. And we can include Caesar in that, and in Greece, people like Aristotle. This is probably why you're hearing a lot about the Judeo-Christian Bible and its stance on homosexuality, because possibly they were referring to the act of pederasty. And one of the reasons that this might be true is because when the verses talk about the abominations, it's bestiality, it's sodomy, and then supposedly homosexuality. Homosexuality does not fit with those because the other two are about hierarchical, I can never say it, you know what I'm saying, hierarchy and power. It's one person who is putting upon another something, and that person is a victim. Homosexuality is a relationship between two consensual adults. So why it wasn't totally seen as pedophilia is because these were usually older adolescents. They were about the same age as a young woman would be when they would marry also. If pederasty was practiced today, it wouldn't be practiced by the people you see at Pride. It would be practiced by our most masculine and powerful men, our Bezos, our Elon Musks, our Tom Bradys. It was about power.
How many times, like a week, or just how many times in general, do you think about the Roman Empire?
What about the Roman Empire?
Just anything about it.
Probably not a lot. Why?
Not a lot? When was the last time you thought about it?
Maybe a week or two ago. The Roman Empire was a very big part in history.
So how often do you think about it?
Not a lot.
How often? Once every month?
Maybe 3 or 4 times a month.
You think about the Roman Empire once a week.
It has a lot of big, like, stories and lessons, like, within the Roman Empire of what to do and what not to do. So, yeah.
So you think about the Roman Empire once a week?
Sometimes, yeah. But not necessarily.
This video comes with a trigger warning. I'm going to use the word grape. This video is about the Romans. In ancient Rome, grape was not about sex. It was about domination and humiliation. Roman elites used sexual violence to assert themselves politically. It was social dominance, especially over slaves, women, their enemies, even citizens of a lower rank. There was no concept of consent as we know it in ancient Rome. Roman law focused on protecting the paterfamilias, the head of the family. It was all about property rights. Grape was only seen as a crime if you violated another man's control of his property. It's only a crime for you to grape somebody else's daughter. And enslaved people could not legally be graped as their bodies were property. The Romans used grape as a tool of empire. Enslaving conquered people came with brutal sexual exploitation. Roman historians like Livy and Tacitus describe grape as standard practice for the Romans when conquering. The grape of the Sabine women was mythologized as the birth of Roman families, an act that was necessary and noble, but it was actually mass abduction. You see, early Rome had a problem. There were no women. So legend has it, Romulus invited the neighbouring Sabines to a festival. And during the event, they abducted the women and forced them to become wives of Roman men. Roman soldiers were encouraged to humiliate defeated enemies with sexual violence because Roman masculinity equated to virility, and being penetrated, regardless of gender, was a mark of shame. Roman culture normalized abuse. Roman satire, poetry, and even graffiti reveal a society that was steeped in sexual threats, rampant with casual abuse, and that mocked the violated. Roman writers like Martial and Juvenal joked about grape and used it to insult their enemies. When Rome is held up as the gold standard in civilization, empire mindset itself is sanitized and normalized. Brutal conquest, enslavement and genocide are synonymous with the Roman Empire. Reframing that as progress or inevitable development or natural order is so incredibly harmful. Roman society was hyper-patriarchal. Women were property, and your masculinity was measured in your ability to be violent and dominate others. Glorifying Rome is a blueprint for toxic masculinity. Western curriculums produce emotionless conquerors and perpetuate a misled idea that men should lead, and that to do so requires domination. This is why Andrew Tate fans love Stoicism. It gives them a license to kill. School children should not be reading Caesar's diaries. He enslaved 1 million people. Mussolini explicitly styled fascism after Roman glory. And even today, right-wing, patriarchal, dominating mindsets love an old Roman aesthetic. Statues and symbols that signal white supremacy. Make Rome great again. It's a dog whistle. Western children are done a disservice to their intelligence by focusing on Roman brilliance, but not talking about Carthage or Benin or Persia or China. Why are we learning Latin in school but not Yoruba? What about the Kush Empire or the Phoenicians? What do you know about the empires of Mali or the Indus Valley? Did you know that most of the technical revolutions that the West are so proud of, like paper and printing and gunpowder and advanced bureaucracy, came from China? What do you know about the Tang or the Song dynasties? Buddhist kingdoms built entire civilizations around spiritual wisdom, non-violent, monastic education, a radical contrast to Rome's warrior cult. We talk about the Romans built the roads. Yeah, but the Incas had already built roads and they had done it without wheels. Yet they were highly efficient. We don't talk about that. While the Romans had pushed Europe into black chaos, the Dark Ages, which are often misattributed to the fall of Rome. Rome never fell. While this was happening in Europe, the Islamic Golden Age was bringing the world hospitals, libraries, universities, algebra, optics, medicine. All Rome ever did was stole other people's great work, claimed it as their own, burned everybody else's books, and then degraded them just for good fun. Civilization did not start with white men. Let's decolonize that idea now.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
What?
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Why'd you ask me that?
Because I'm curious.
Somebody here?
No.
Why would you ask me that?
I just want to know. How often do you think about it?
You police or something? How do you know I think about that?
How often?
I'm just trying to figure out why you would ask me something like that. How do you know?
But how often, like daily, weekly?
All the time.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. We've never talked about that. Why are you asking me about that? What is that? What are you doing?
But like how often? You still haven't answered me besides all the time. Like every day? Every week?
I don't know. Why?
Daily? Weekly?
Did somebody tell you to ask me that?
No! But how often do you think about it?
That's weird. We don't talk about stuff like that.
Can you answer me though?
Daily?
How many times a day?
I don't know. 2, 3?
Daily.
Probably. Why would you ask me that though? I'm trying to figure out how you would even know to ask me that because we don't talk about that. We've never talked about.
What about the Roman Empire do you think about?
Well, what's there not to think about? Why are you videotaping this?
He is gay. He is a gay man. He can deny it all he wants. He's a homosexual person.
The obsession that white Western men have with the Roman Empire really could not be separated from Mussolini. A bold statement, yes, but true nonetheless. As we know, ultranationalism is a key aspect of fascism, and the Italian fascist Mussolini used ancient Rome to create a single identity that Italians could look towards as a symbol of a past glory that cemented a present supremacy. Some key aspects of this identity were rooted in hypermasculinity, virility, racial supremacy, and of course, imperialism. Both hypermasculinity and virility were moralized as traditional values that showcased a commitment to preserving the Roman heritage of this newly crafted Italian identity. This patriarchal version of masculinity was also used as a symbol of absolute power and strength, as one of the key aspects of ancient Rome that Mussolini was obsessed with were the rulers. As an absolute ruler, Julius Caesar in particular caught his eye, and he saw himself as a new Caesar who would usher in a modernized version of the Roman Empire, complete with absolute rule, as fascist dictators tend to want to do. This was such a key element of Mussolini's regime that the word fascism is rooted in the word fasces, which refers to a bundle of sticks with an axe head at the top. This symbol first came from the Etruscans and was then passed on to ancient Romans and symbolized a king's ability to punish his citizens, therefore tying masculinity under fascism to complete authoritarian rule and conquest, be it conquest of your own subjects or the conquest of subjects in foreign lands. This foreign conquest was a really integral part of Mussolini's vision of Romanita, aka Romanness. Don't forget that Mussolini reigned during a time in which colonialism was still in full swing, and many of the European powers had secured tons of colonies. Meanwhile, Italy really didn't have any. Part of restoring the glory of the Roman Empire was to conquer the same lands that had once been conquered under Roman rule. The Roman Empire had once covered the entirety of North Africa, but imperialism under Mussolini's rule only included Libya, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Nevertheless, it was enough to be seen as a win, because now he was not only the ruler in Italy, but also in these colonies. And yes, of course, disclaimer, Ethiopia was never formally colonized, but it was conquered. That said, we can't separate this imperialist conquest from the narratives that were spun during the time of Mussolini's rule about why it was justifiable to conquer and colonize certain people. European colonialism was rooted in the derision of perceived African inferiority, which was heavily juxtaposed against European advancement, namely that of the Roman Empire. Technological advancements of the Roman Empire aren't just praised in an isolated vacuum. They're contrasted against the so-called lack of innovations of other societies that are deemed as inferior. In fact, conversations about why Africa has mud huts are always contrasted against the Roman aqueducts and road systems. It is a white supremacist talking point, especially because the Western world is seen as the rightful heirs to ancient Rome. This is amplified by the fact that the Roman Empire in question is always the ancient Roman Empire, but not the Byzantium version of the Roman Empire that existed in what is today Istanbul, that was once Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire is not what Western Europeans view as something that's part of their identity. It is only the mythos of the ancient Roman Empire as a symbol of European advancement that's absorbed as this identity, even for Western Europeans who don't come from countries that were once part of the Roman Empire. The Cavernacle makes that point in his YouTube video, and I thought that was just a stellar point, so definitely go check that out. All the men who think about the Roman Empire constantly are obsessed with it because they see themselves as the rightful heirs to that level of advancement in human ingenuity. similar mythos exists for ancient Greece, and I actually made a video about this on my Aesthetic Joys channel in which I discuss how ancient Greece was so fully immersed in the Eastern world, but is seen as the heart of Western civilization. Similarly, the Roman Empire, as I mentioned earlier, once covered North Africa, but North Africans are not seen as rightful heirs to that identity. So the next time a white man tells you about how much he thinks about the Roman Empire, let him know that it's actually as a result of a mythology spun by an Italian fascist. Challenge them to think about other aspects of human ingenuity outside of ancient Rome, such as Incan roads, such as the fact that iron smelting developed independently in Africa, such as the Islamic Golden Age, the Indus Valley Civilization, such as the fact that mud huts had a purpose and they served a function in societies in which mud was the optimal building material. Debunking fascist mythologies in our personal lives is as important as debunking them on the political arena. As you know, we're gearing up for the 2024 election and fascism is on its rise. We're going to be ramping up political content as we work on coverage for the 2024 elections for our civic tech platform, The Down Ballot.
My mind has been officially blown doing a deep dive into who the Groypers are. One of my homegirls was talking about Groypers today, and I'm like, girl, what the fuck is that word that you're saying? And she was like, girl, you never heard of it? Groypers? I'm like, no. First of all, hate the name, absolutely. And secondly, you guys are literally terrible human beings. So the Groypers are essentially this fringe, like super alt-right group of people who are working from the inside of MAGA to push MAGA even further right, and they're led by Nick Fuentes. They believe that MAGA is too far left or too moderate, if that makes sense. They would prefer if MAGA pushed it extremely to the far alt-right. And their leader, Nick Fuentes, holds views like women shouldn't be allowed to vote, or black people inherently have low IQs due to nature, like wild shit. And their leader, Nick Fuentes, has been banned from like every single app. PayPal, YouTube, I think TikTok. The only place you can really find him is Rumble. The Groypers even have their own like chronically online language and a soundtrack that went along with their 2019 Groyper Wars, where Groypers would go out and challenge Charlie Kirk's moderate viewpoints. And interesting fact, that song Bella Ciao that was written on the cartridges or the bullets of the gun that Tyler Robinson used to ultimately take the life of Charlie Kirk was remixed on the Groyper soundtrack, America First. Anywho, as we see on both sides of the right, the Groypers and MAGA, they like to hide their hatred, their misogyny, their racism, their transphobia, their homophobia behind Christianity and Catholicism. And I thought that that was very interesting when I found out that a good subsect of the Groypers are literally obsessed with like femboys. I learned what a trap is today, and I know that's offensive to some people, but baby, when I tell you the deep dive that I did of 4chan and Reddit and subreddits, the trap content is not consuming itself. Go read the article Traps and Trolling, Brain Melt in the Digital Future. That was a very interesting read. What a trap is, so I can stop saying the word and offending people, is essentially like a femboy or a crossdresser or maybe a baby trans who is able to present very female while still being male, hence the word trap alluding to deception. They are not the same as what we know as trans women, which is why I find it interesting that the right is trying to shift the blame onto the trans community, because this could be a whole femboy love situation from a person who refused to be an incel like their leader, Nick Fuentes. So let's refrain from jumping to conclusions and trying to blame an entire community. Let the court systems do its process. We will get a statement from him eventually. All of that and a bag of chips being said, as always, it is your girl day. Comment your thoughts down below specifically. If you were someone who came up in the time of Tumblr, 4chan, Reddit, all the things, because I would appreciate you guys' input.
European translation and interpretation of Christianity is the reason why we have the alt-right extreme Groyper culture that is violent and full of rage. Walk with me. We often see that white Christian heterosexual males have an obsession with ancient Rome or Greece. But these same dudes who are idolizing Western culture's classic civilizations are worshipping cultures where men were openly bisexual, wore dresses, wrote love poems to each other, and expressed and showed their thighs in ways that heterosexual alpha males today would call gay. Ancient Greece and Rome were not straight heterosexual cultures. In Greece, especially among the elites, male-on-male relationships were structured and common. They were not always the healthiest of relationships, but they were normalized. Romans were a little bit different, but men could still engage sexually with other men as long as they were the dominant partner. because sexuality wasn't about straight or gay. It was about status, power, and masculinity. The point is they did not see sexuality as binary. They saw it as fluid. They expressed it through fluidity, and it was tied to hierarchy. So when Christianity rose to power in Rome, especially after Constantine in 4th century CE, it framed sexuality as sinful unless it was between a male to female within marriage, and solely for the purpose of procreation. This is where we see homosexuality going from normal to sinful. It went from common practice to abomination. The church created a rigid sexual morality system, because if you control sexuality, you control the people. Now, fast forward to colonization. European colonizers used Christianity to control and police bodies and sexuality everywhere that they went. Indigenous, African, and global cultures that allowed fluidity, 3 genders, and all-around freer sexual expression were violently suppressed. Whiteness became tied to purity. Purity means rigid gender roles, heterosexuality, and Christian patriarchy. This is the same purity test that exists in Groyper alt-right meme culture. Now, through the spread of Christianity and colonization, in the 19th and 20th century, modern masculinity has hardened into straightness equals manhood, femininity equals weakness, and gay equals shame. This is the air that white men grow up breathing. Add in fascism and nationalism in the 20th century, Yahtzee is obsessed with the perfect male body but demonizing queerness. And boom, you get the contradictory mess that we see today. The far alt-right obsess over Greece and Rome because they see them as the pinnacle of white civilization. But we know that civilization existed long before Greece and Rome. But that's another video. They drool over the status of Spartan warriors, gladiators, muscular armed men, while ignoring and repressing the fact that those same men were wildly sexually fluid by modern standards. That obsession is projection. They crave the freedom and the beauty that men had in that culture. But their Christian white supremacist upbringing tells them that it's shameful, and that shame turns into rage. While they continue to idolize, but turn it towards the aesthetic, the bodies, the muscles, the discipline, the militarization, the weapons, the marble statues, but they repress the truth, the fluidity, the flamboyance, the eroticism. So yeah, these young white men are stuck in a paradox. They want to be Spartan warriors, admired and desired by men and women. But their culture tells them that if they are not hypermasculine, 100% heterosexual, and dominant over women, that they are nothing. That repression fuels rage, homophobia, misogyny, racism, and the entire incel to fascist pipeline. The obsession with Rome and Greece is tied to repression. They are drawn to those cultures because deep down, maybe not that deep, but they want the freedom that those men had to be beautiful, to be desired, to be soft, to be intimate, to be expressive. But their white Christian upbringing tells them that that is forbidden. They are worshiping a past that they will never allow themselves to embrace. They are running from their truth while also embracing it in the most toxic of ways. That is why this entire incel alt-right meme, Groyper, edgelord culture is so full of contradictions. That is how we got here. Because in white Christian society, men are not allowed to be free, soft, and expressive. And they mourn that. They live in fear of being ostracized from their society because their society tells them they're going to hell. And that is why we're in the mess that we're in.
You've heard the claim, the gay king who wrote the Bible. Let's break that down, because the facts are even more complicated than they sound. In 1604, King James I of England authorized what would become the King James Bible, a monumental English translation used by millions. He didn't write it word for word, but he chose the scholars, set the translation rules, and approved the final edits. Some historians describe it as his political masterpiece. He shaped its tone, its structure, and in many ways, its power. Now here's where it gets harder to reconcile. This same King James, who left his name on the Bible, also left behind decades of intimate letters to a man, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. These weren't subtle. I desire only to live in your heart, die in your arms, and be buried in the same grave. King James I to the Duke of Buckingham. He called Villiers his sweet child and wife. He kissed him publicly. And when Parliament accused them of indecency, James didn't deny it. He said their love was like David and Jonathan's in the Bible. And here's the contradiction. The King James Bible has been used for centuries to condemn LGBTQ+ people, but the word homosexual never appeared in any Bible until 1946. In the original Hebrew and Greek, the words referred to exploitation and abuse, not love. The mistranslation came centuries later, ironically tied to a king who likely loved men himself. So yes, King James commissioned the Bible, but he also left behind some of the most romantic love letters ever written by a monarch to another man. So no, King James didn't sit down and write the Bible word for word, but he authorized it, directed it, and his name has defined that version for over 400 years. Some may still say he wrote the Bible, not because he was a translator, but because his influence is in every chapter. And the irony? The very name used to justify the persecution of LGBTQ+ people.
King James liked men, and everyone knew. The man who commissioned one of the first English translations of the Bible and came out hard against sodomy liked men. The king's most well-known companion was George Villiers. They had a close and controversial relationship, but he was a prominent figure in King James's court. James's court called him out for favoriting George. And instead of denying it, he called everyone together and said, "You can be sure I love George more than you all." He compared his relationship with George to Jesus and John the Evangelist. About their relationship, this 17th century poet wrote, and it is well known that the King of England the Duke of Buckingham. In some letters, James even refers to George as his spouse. Although he had romantic relationships with men, he was also married to Anne of Denmark and had 8 children with her. And he also had a female mistress, Anne Murray. He was 33, his Jesus age. He published the Basilicon de Rhone. In it, he lists sodomy as an unforgivable crime. He also directed the judges in England not to issue any pardons for sodomy. Him being a hypocrite had nothing to do with his orientation. The most scandalous pope throughout history was probably Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, who seemed to be exclusively interested in women. Like and follow for more.
King James wrote a series of very passionate love letters to George Villiers, one of which is this: "God so loved me as I desire only to live in this world for your sake, and that I had rather live banished in any part of the earth than live a sorrowful widow's life without you. And so God bless you, my sweet child and wife, and grant that ye ever be a comfort to your dear dad and husband." And what did he mean by that?